Hi, welcome to my first ever YouTube video. I'm going to be building a wormery that is for use for keeping the worms for feeding reptiles, or in my case my Pac-Man frog Vera. Excuse any noises in the background. Rufus the dog is busy chewing a plastic bottle underneath the bed. I decided to make this video because I couldn't find one that was for wormeries for use for the worms for food. It was all purely for composting, so this one's going to be kind of a combination. First thing you need is some plastic boxes, 2 to start with, but then you can use more, and 1 lid. So your first box, because these are going to be piled up together, you're going to leave intact. This is what's going to collect the worm tea. That's like the liquid overrun from the worms, which you can dilute. I think it's 10 to 1 with water to use as plant feed. The next box you're going to need is going to have fine holes in the bottom. I'm not sure how well you can see them. I sort of peppered it with lots of small holes using a probably less than a millimetre, probably maybe half a millimetre drill bit, and I tested it and poured some water through to make sure it passed, and while it did I felt it was a little slow, so I made some of them a little larger, and they are possibly up to 1.5 mil. And then around the top again I used that 1.5 mil drill bit to put 2 rows of air holes, so that when the boxes are stacked together that's clear of the lower box to allow for good ventilation, because worms, even though they live underground, they do breathe, and they breathe through their skin, and you need some good airflow. You don't want the holes big enough so that any flies or anything can get in, because I'm going to be keeping this indoors, but you do want to allow for good airflow to help ventilate things, get air in for the worms, and help with the decomposting process as well. So that's the first box. This box will remain always at the bottom of the pile. As it has the smaller holes, the worms can't pass through those holes to drown in the worm tea, but the liquid can pass through and collect in the bottom. So I've got sort of just over an inch gap there. Into that, I'm going to start off with the cocoa compost stuff, kind of stuff that you use in the bottom of your tank for your worms, and I guess some reptiles, for the frog and for some reptiles as well. We're going to add to that a carbon source, cardboard, paper, something along those lines. I'm going to use some newspaper, but because these worms are going to be used to feed my frog, I kind of didn't want to use the ink in the paper, so what I've done is I've trimmed off the edges of a newspaper. So yes, I've got the odd little bit of colour and the date written on some of the strips, but for the most part it's blank paper. And I'll also be putting the food in there. I'm going to be using carrot and banana peel, because apparently worms really love banana peel and the potassium in it is quite good for them. So here's one I ate earlier. And some eggshells as a source of calcium, which hopefully will help calcium for the frog, but it actually provides a grit, because worms don't have teeth, and like chickens they need a bit of grit in their food to help grind it up. I guess the same way that fish sort of swallow the gravel from the bottom of the tank to help process the food. Yeah, and because I'm not using soil, it won't have any actual grit in, because I didn't want to use anything that might have chemicals in, because it will then be coating the worms when I drop it in for the frog to eat. And you're also going to need a lid for your boxes. I've drilled some small holes in again, just to allow for air ventilation. And this is purely experimental at the moment, so I'm hoping that I've drilled enough. I think you can see the holes there. So once I've put everything in this box and obviously added the worms, you then need additional boxes to go on top. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do at this stage. In theory, you have a box with large holes in the bottom that the worms can pass through. So when you feel they've composted everything in the bottom box, you would put this box over the top and it would rest on top of the composting material and lower down. and the worms can travel up through the holes into this layer where you would already have some more of the cocoa bark and some food. You would stop feeding in the lower box, put the food in the top one to encourage them to travel up. That does present me with a problem in that it's got large holes in the bottom that the worms can come back out of into the bottom layer. And I'm going to have to take the bottom layer out to empty the worm castings off, which is basically the worm poop, the stuff that they've composted, and then put it back again because it's got the small holes in for the water. So I haven't quite worked this through yet, but I'm hoping it'll take a little while for them to get through that first layer anyway. Again, I've put some air holes in the top of this box, and then the theory being you can just sort of keep piling those boxes up and then take the bottom one out and put it back on the top. And obviously you need your lid on because you don't want any squirmy wormies escaping or anything getting in there like the dog or flies. Okay, so I'm going to go off camera for a second and I'm going to put the cocoa into the bottom of the box because it is wet, and I'm going to need 2 hands to do it because I don't want it all over my divine bedspread. Okay, so here's my box with the cocoa stuff in. You can see how deep I've got it there and how much of a gap there is. Remember, this is the box with the very small air holes in the bottom, just to allow for the liquid to pass through, and it gives a little ventilation around as well. I've wrung this out so that it's not dripping wet, but it is damp. It needs to be kept damp, so I'm going to be spritzing it with water every now and then. And you've got to make sure it doesn't get too wet, hence the drainage on the bottom, because worms can drown. They don't live underwater and they do breathe air through their skin, so you don't want it too wet or you're going to have floating dead worms. Basically, if your worms are coming to the surface, it's because it's either too wet, which you will be able to tell, or because they're hungry, in which case feed them. So next thing that I'm going to put in is some of the newspaper. Now this probably should have been shredded better, but I'm sure the worms can work that out themselves. Here we go. Mix that up a bit. And I will put the worms in next. Now I have 2 tubs of worms here. Now ideally for feeding my frog I wanted night crawlers, which live deep down in the ground and then come up at night, hence the name. They also get called lobworms. The shop that I get the food from just sells them as small worm pre-pack, so I've got 2 tubs there. So we don't actually know what kind of worms they are, but the frog has eaten them and she seems to like them. So I'm going to go off camera to take these lids off and tip them into the box, and then you can see them when they're tipped in. Okay, so that's 2 tubs of worms in there. I think you can see them wriggling around. I'm going to put my fingers in and point them out. There's actually quite a lot of worms in there for 2 small tubs, which is probably why they don't live for very long in the small tubs. Now, they should breed in here if they're happy, and I believe they can triple their population every couple of months or something, so as long as I keep feeding them to the frog and keep them happy in here, I should be able to keep the population under control. If I end up with too many worms, I'll be giving some to friends and some of the children that I work with, so they can have wormeries in their bedrooms. Oh, you can see them wriggling there. Okay, so they obviously come in a sort of a cocoa composty kind of thing as well, so that gives a nice layer over the top of the paper. I'm going to put some food on top now. In fact, I might give them a little squirt of water first, just because the stuff they came in, I seem to remember, was quite dry. So I've just got a water spray here. Now this actually has spring water in, because this is what I use for watering down the frog. The newspaper does need to be damp as well. There we go. That should get that nice and wet. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to put some of the food in now for them. Ah, little squirmy wormies. So, I'm going to crumble some of the eggshell in. Oops. Do not put dairy in your wormery, because it can go rancid. Don't put meat in because it can go rancid. And at the end of the day, I don't want to put anything in that ultimately, when it's inside the worm, is going to cause the frog any problems. I want to sort of gut load the worms on things that are going to do my frog some good when she then eats it. Unfortunately, I can't put citrus in because it's too acidic for the worms. You also can't put anything from the onion family in, so onion, garlic, etc., because that's harmful to the worms as well. It's toxic. And they do enjoy potato peelings, but only in a very, very small quantity, because that can cause the worms problems as well. Think of these as little pets. You want to look after them. They're going to look after you. You also want to make sure that things have a large surface area, so chop them up, because you need the bacteria to develop on them to be able to, there's a worm, to be able to help rot the food so that the worms can eat it and enjoy it. So I've cut this sort of small ends of carrot quite thinly there, so the air can get at them. Still covered in eggshell. And I'm not going to put this whole banana peel in, I'm just going to put one section in, because you don't want to put too much food in, because if the worms don't eat it, again, it will just go rancid. There we go, so there's some banana peel. Now hopefully this will sort itself out and the worms will be happy in there. I'm just going to put a little bit more carrot in. This was left over from feeding the cockroaches the other day. I saved a little bit. Right, so those guys are in there. Hopefully they'll be happy. They're not on the surface anymore. They've already started wriggling down. And I'm going to put the lid on top with my very sticky hands in a moment. The other thing you need to remember is worms really do like the dark. I'm going to be keeping these in a corner of the bedroom where it is quite dark. It's where the cockroaches and the frog live anyway, so it doesn't get direct sunlight. I may try and work out a way of putting some temporary cover around it. I didn't want to start investing in loads of sticky back plastic and aquarium scenery to stick on, because the boxes have got obviously little wibbles in where they slide into each other, or if you turn them around they stack. So maybe some sort of black paper slide on, slide off cover, because I would like to be able to see the worms through the sides and see what they're getting up to and keep an eye on them. Okay, so keep having a look back. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I will be able to update it and let you know what I've decided to do for additional layers of the wormery. And any comments or suggestions you have, please feel free to leave them, and hopefully I can answer any questions or adapt my wormery to any suggestions anybody may have. So thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.